Good morning. This is Jason Dean at YouTube, Film Fanatic. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Saturday at 9:22. So, if you get the chance, please like and subscribe to this channel. I love the feedback I've been getting, and also people have been starting to comment a little bit more. Like I've said, I've been looking at this whole project as a work in progress. Really, I'm learning as I go. I'm starting to look into trying to get some software going so I can start editing these videos and make them try to put a little bit of a theatrical element to the presentations. I haven't had too much luck. I have a little bit of an issue around grasping a lot of new technology a lot of the times, but I've been trying on my own with a couple of different programs. Haven't had much luck, but I'm still shooting around the World Wide Web and finding some new things. So stay tuned for that. That will eventually happen. So I started back probably with the idea of maybe doing some shows on this channel around some franchises that I love. The first one I did was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. To a degree, I did that, but the first fully realized franchise that I did was the Friday the 13th films. That was great. I did all of those films. I felt like that was a new thing, and it was my first time covering all the movies. I watched all the films in succession and did reviews, and it was a blast, and I learned a lot, and it was a lot of work, but it was really cool. And I followed that up with the Halloween franchise. With that franchise, it was a little bit different because I left out a few of those movies, a few of the movies that are included in the franchise, mainly because I wasn't, I really love that franchise, and Michael Myers for me is an iconic figure in horror without a doubt, and I'm sure anybody else out there in the world that considers themselves fans of horror films, it's probably he probably as a character means the same thing. But what I ended up doing with that franchise, or the coverage of that franchise, I just basically picked the movies because it's a huge franchise. I would almost kind of say there might be even more movies in that franchise, in the Halloween franchise, than there is for the Friday 13th franchise. And in comparison, the Friday 13th franchise is something that's just kind of part of my DNA. So I have a real deep love and affection for everything tied to that franchise. So I did all of those films. I do also for Halloween, but I just felt I'm not as drawn and connected to each film as I am to in comparison to, say, Friday 13th. Then I did another franchise. I think the following franchise that I did, I covered the Avengers movies. I'm a huge Marvel comic books fan and nerd. I really love the Avenger movies. So, with the exception of one movie that I did leave out, The Age of Ultron, I covered all the other films. And that was great because I own all of those also on Blu-ray. So I watched all of those in succession, and it was even more exciting than I thought it would be to watch them in succession like that. And it was great. So I had this idea. It was probably a couple of months ago. I'm a huge fan of Psycho, and today's show is going to be about Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock. Today's show is going to be mostly centered on Psycho from 1960. And around a few months ago, a couple of guys that I watch on YouTube were talking about the franchise of Psycho, and for some reason, I didn't. And a lot of the times I don't really think of the Psycho films to be. I don't really equate that a lot of times as being a franchise for some reason. And then so after I kept hearing about Psycho 2 and Psycho 3, and then there's also a fourth one, which was, I believe, was a TV series. The two other movies, Part 2 and Part 3, were both theatrical releases as well. I went out and I was able to see Psycho 2. I rented it at the local shop, Opera House Video, and I hadn't seen the rest of those. I've seen all of them, all of those movies, but then I hadn't seen. It was literally like watching it for the first time, and I watched it part two, and I just was kind of blown away by how great of a film it was, and how tonally it was very different, and the storyline was great, and I was like, this is a really great movie. As much as I love the original, I was like, this is a really great follow up. So then last night I rented Psycho 3, which was directed by Anthony Perkins, who is the star, Norman Bates, in the original Psycho. And I found myself really loving that movie too. I was like, this is really great. In some ways, I almost enjoyed it more than the rest of the movies. It's a little bit more of a slasher film. I was really blown away by it. And when I kind of got back into checking out these films, a couple of guys that I follow on YouTube were talking, extensively about this movie and looking at Psycho as a complete franchise. I didn't really think of that, but after watching these movies, I realized, wow, like this is a pretty awesome franchise. So today's show is going to be the first one of my newest coverage of a new franchise show. I'm going to do all of the movies in the Psycho world. I'm going to start off today. I'm going to start off with the first one by Alfred Hitchcock, 1960, and then I'm going to go through each movie in succession and in order. So I'm pretty excited about it. I didn't realize how great the other films were, and how much I almost felt they were almost my favorite, and to a degree they each kind of got better. I was really surprised. The fourth one, I know I've probably have seen it, but that was I guess a TV movie. So I'll eventually get to that too. And I know that there was a TV series spin-off, and I believe it was called The Bates Motel, which is kind of separate from these movies. It's a completely different storyline as far as what I remember it being, and I remember watching some of it back when it was on cable quite a few years ago, and I remember it being okay, but I don't know if I would go as far as saying that it's directly related to these films, all four of them. But after watching these films, it just, a light went off, and I was like, this would be a great franchise to talk about and to cover, because for me, I completely forgot about these movies, and I kind of had a weird thing of where I kind of forsaken them, and I forgot how great they are. So cheers, yeah, and thanks again for everyone supporting the page. It's been really fun. The last 5 days or so, I had about 20,000 hits on my channel. I've been really, been cranking out more videos each day. I just did a big show, well, at least for me, I did a big show on Thanksgiving Day, where I did a video on Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather. I was really amazed by the amount of people that checked out that video, and for me, that's my favorite film of all time. So that kind of means a little bit more to me, that people are into it and checking it out, and so I really appreciate it. And if you are new to this channel, please like and subscribe. There's going to be more, new things happening. One of the big things I'm going to do, and it's going to go up today, is I'm going to have a Film Fanatic watch party. I tried doing it a few months ago, but some things came up, and I had to cancel it. So that's going to be, I think, a pretty cool event, and kind of an experiment to a degree. It's going to be centered on tying in some of the things from from one of the, well, I guess the original franchise coverage that I did of Friday 13th. Basically, it's going to be a live watch party where people in the flesh. I'm going to have try to have a little get together, a little party, and we're going to watch Freddy vs. Jason. And I'm going to the goal is to like record it and upload it to the channel and just record people's reactions, and I think it'll be a cool kind of celebratory thing of this whole page and especially that franchise. This was an event that I tried to do quite a while ago, and things came up, wasn't able to do it, so stay tuned for that. That's going to be a new thing. Who knows if anybody will actually show up? We'll see, but that's the goal, and it could be just a good excuse to kind of have a party. So I'm going to do some promotion, put up an event page. It's going to be a public event, so space and seating will kind of be kind of limited to a degree. But we'll see. We'll see what happens, and it'll be a new experiment. It could be a lot of fun, and I figure it'd be a cool thing to kind of celebrate not only that beloved franchise, but also to kind of celebrate this page kind of growing and all of the new things that have been kind of popping up around it. So I really appreciate it. I really appreciate people's support and listening to me rant about these beloved movies of mine. So cheers. So today's show is going to be all centered on Psycho. This came out in 1960, of course directed by Alfred Hitchcock, along with the iconic music composed by Bernard Herrmann. Easily probably one of the most influential horror movies of all time. I definitely consider Psycho to be a horror movie, and also I look at it to a degree as kind of being a slasher film. And this came out in 1960. It's just such an iconic movie, and there's been so many things that have been said about this film. Obviously Anthony Perkins, who stars as Norman Bates, Janet Leigh, Marion Crane, Vera Miles, Lilia Crane, and Alfred Hitchcock's daughter, Pat Hitchcock. She plays Caroline. John A. Gavin, he plays Sam Loomis, and Virginia Gregg, and Martin Balsam as Milton Borga, who is the investigative cop or hired investigative person who goes looking for missing people. I've always loved his role in this film, and this marked a big occasion in the world of horror. Janet Leigh, the mother of Janet Lee Curtis. This really marked a special time, I feel like, in cinematic history and as far as horror. And, I always think of, when I revisit a lot of these classics, what it must have been like to have seen some of these films when they came out, especially during the period in time when they came out. I often think of like a film like this, seeing something like this, paying a ticket and going to the theater in 1960 to see a film like this, where I feel like it still holds so much weight to it, and it's still ahead of its time. It's still, every time I've seen it, it's still fresh. I think it's still such an amazing thriller. The iconic shower scene. I always feel it's a very creepy movie. It has a real high level of suspense. It's such an iconic movie, and I definitely think that this film easily, went on to shape horror movie history. I think, in the big picture of things, in the large, and if you're looking at things through a large lens, I think if this movie didn't exist, it would, horror in 2022 would be different. I think this movie was so ahead of its time. So, and also with Hitchcock, to a degree, like a lot of the times in current horror films, things are, we have our basic tropes, in horror films where, for slasher films, there's usually copious amounts of gore. Usually, fans of slasher films say, like for me, and slasher films are my favorite. There's like those, certain tropes that you want to see in a slasher film. Copious amounts of gore, and then also for me being a fan of the horror exploitation world, I want to see copious amounts of gore. I love the sleazy element, the sleaze factor. I also love the low budget aspect of it. I love that it has a rawness to it. And so as a viewer of or as a fan of a particular genre, there are these tropes around us. You kind of expect those things to happen, and then also getting slightly away from that, but with more, I guess you could say, conventional or big Hollywood budget films, particularly around horror films. There's always the jump scare. That's kind of a thing where that's a pretty steady diet in those films. But Hitchcock was unique. He really focused on a concept that I have always gravitated towards, not only in film, but also with music. And especially like for me as a writer, as a a songwriter, I look at that too. And even from the way I try to approach music, I kind of taken that's another thing. Like I've talked about all of the similarities between music and film, and how to me they're just they're all part of the same tree for me. But I think of the less is more approach, and I feel like with Hitchcock, he was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, purveyor of that uh, notion. Meaning, like a lot of the times, what you don't see is often more frightening, and the idea of building up tension to a degree to where, and also giving you enough exposition around the characters. Hopefully, the story has a real clear and concise lineage to it. But once you have like your central characters on screen, and hopefully the characters are fleshed out, you're giving the viewers just the right amount of information, and you automatically, if the film is done at a high level, you just automatically, I know for me, if I watch a film, I was talking about it the other day, like I did a show yesterday on Pearl, and there's a few characters in that film that are not necessarily in the film very long, but automatically I just loved the different shades that they brought to the big screen, and where I felt like I don't really know necessarily who they are or what they are, but they just give the right element, and I'm given as a viewer just the right amount of information to where even for like the lesser known characters, and especially the larger characters or the main characters, but I have a sense of empathy towards them, and I kind of care about what's going to happen to them. And I think Hitchcock was a master of that, doing this brilliant work in the 60s, where he focused on that as being the centerpiece, developing the characters, giving you just the right amount of information. And I've seen interviews with him where he talks about, if you have those people, in the palm of your hand, meaning the audience, and you have enough exposition and enough of a character development, and the viewer has empathy or cares about the characters, at that point, the director, the filmmaker can, that he has those people, his audience in the palm of his hand, so he can kind of take them anywhere. they'll at that point they're along for the ride. So, and with that, with Hitchcock being a master, he was a master filmmaker and the master of suspense. You can take them on that journey, and so when things do take various different turns or degrees of where maybe there is violence, it's incredibly and highly effective. Do you think of, say, per se, like maybe in slasher film terms, the kill count, the body count. I remember always hearing that term, particularly growing up around like the Friday 13th franchise, and that's a trope of slasher films. The thing with, and if you apply that to, say, the Psycho film, the kill count is relatively low. There aren't there isn't necessarily a lot that you're seeing around that. But when it does happen, particularly like, say, the shower scene, it's so effective, and I feel it's all due to the incredible writing and the suspense, and it's leading up to where these events happen, and by leading up to that, you're just, as a viewer, you're just completely invested in it, and so you're along for that ride. So when you do have that experience, or when the film does go into that area or that direction, you're having a real experience, and it's really frightening, or it's really jarring, or it's exciting. And that's, to me, is, I feel like he was the king of suspense, but then the whole notion of like less is more. A lot of the times subtlety, and a lot of the times what you don't say, or what you don't necessarily get, or say information that you're not being told, but things are implied, are a lot of the times way more effective than if things were, to a degree, ham-handed to you, or everything was out on the table. Because I think it also causes your imagination to go wild, which is, I think, the main reason why we watch cinema, is to have that escape. And Hitchcock was a master of that. I mean, so, like I talk about X and Ty West in the last two movies that I did. Very much so. Very much, I think. I think Ty West was very much, out of that school of thought. The less is more, and obviously Hitchcock had a huge influence. But it's also about creating this atmosphere to where when things do go down, or things do take a turn where there's extreme violence, it's that much more exciting, and it's that much more of a payoff. So I always find it super fascinating how influential he was as a filmmaker, and as well, such a great collection of films that he's done over the years. Vertigo, The Birds. I mean, just so many. The Rear Window. Endless amounts of just incredible, just an incredible body of work. I did a show on Psycho quite a few, probably about a year ago. It was when I was just doing the Facebook Live videos on my Film Fanatic page on Facebook, and I did a big show on Hitchcock. It was mostly centered on. I tried to have the show focused on, his whole like career, and I found myself even in that show, and when I was doing some work and a little bit of research, I was thinking of like my top, favorite films of Hitchcock, and I kind of always come back to Psycho. I love Vertigo. I really love Rear Window, Dial M for Murder. Just so many great films. But I think overall the one that I've seen the most is definitely Psycho. It's, obviously, I think for out of his career and out of all the films that he had done, I would say that's, probably would fit under that. That film is definitely more of a horror film. I would say that's like his horror genre film. All of the other films have intrigue and suspense, and they're very dark. But this, I feel like this ushered in a different time in his career, and also after Psycho came out, I think it changed cinema. Suddenly, there were lots of, horror now was something that was being embraced by a large audience, and that there was a viable market for it. So his Alfred Hitchcock's legacy and his influence, is beyond really anything. It's he was definitely one of the most iconic figures in cinema in general. But in regards to horror, this film, without a doubt, you know, everything would have been that we see now in a contemporary lens would be very, very different. And it's funny because I have multiple copies of Psycho. I have so many versions. I think I have like three or four different versions of Psycho on DVD. I have two at least two collector's editions where it comes with a lot of special features. I also have it on Blu-ray, so I have about five or six. Now that I think of it, five or six different editions of the film. I haven't moved into 4K. I don't have a 4K TV. Maybe at some point, but so I've seen this film many times in and I've seen it in many different renditions, and it's I would love to see this on the big screen. I've never gotten a chance. It's always it was so beautifully shot that every time I see it, it's always like a magical experience. I do have it on Blu-ray, and that's probably my favorite edition because of the clarity. There's some really great documentaries, but iconic movie, one of the greatest. And so, yeah, what else? What else can you say about Hitchcock? Master, the a true master filmmaker. The master of a true master of suspense, and definitely ushered in what I would say, to a degree, horror films, and also uh, suspense and slasher films. I had that feeling. I remember when I did the show or shows on the Friday 13th franchise. I remember watching all those. I watched all those films in succession, and I started off with the very first one, directed by Sean S. Cunningham. The first thing I got from watching it, after I've seen it so many times, but I felt like that movie plays out more with like this Hitchcock vibe. It very much reminded me of Alfred Hitchcock. The music, everything, the aesthetic, the pacing, and it's also I forgot how suspenseful it is. And again, like I said, his Hitchcock's influence is just tremendous. So that was another example of that. So yeah, wonderful, wonderful, incredible movie. So stay tuned. I'm going to be doing Psycho 2 next. Really excited about talking about that movie. So cheers. Have a great day. This is Jason, your film fanatic. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my page. Peace.